Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates. Hello everybody, welcome to Daily News Simplified, an answer to what, why and how of newspaper reading. Today we shall be analyzing the Hindu newspaper dated 21st of July 2021 of the New Delhi edition. The topics to be discussed today have been presented on your screen. Time-stamping for the same has been provided in the description box below. See that today's analysis shall be carried out by both me as well as Nagendra sir, wherein the first two articles shall be covered by me, whereas the next two articles will be covered by Nagendra sir. The first article in today's newspaper appears on page number 7 and is titled as Baby Steps Are Better. See, recently the UP government has proposed a draft bill in order to control the population growth rate. Such a draft bill has in turn created intense debate across India. On one hand, it has been argued that such a draft bill will nudge or influence the people to have less number of children and hence reduce the population growth rate. This is one side of the debate. On the other hand, some of the experts are pointing out that already in case of India, the fertility rate is reducing. Because of decrease in the fertility rate, the population growth rate is also reducing. In fact, some of the states in case of India can actually see a decline in their population. Now, amidst all of these demographic developments, when the population growth rate is already reducing, do we actually need a law to control the population growth rate? So this particular aspect of population and rated issues is directly part of your GS paper 1. Apart from that, as you can see, various aspects of population have already been asked in other GS papers as well. For example, it has been asked in both GS paper 2 as well as GS paper 3. This aspect is also important even in the prelims as well. So from the perspective of the UPSC examination, one should be aware about various aspects such as with respect to prelims, the concepts of the fertility rate, replacement level fertility, the relationship between these two, the concept of the sun meta preference, demographic dividend, and from the perspective of the mains examination, what kind of demographic transition is taking place in India and what kind of policy should the government come up with to handle such kind of demographic transition over the next 2 decades. See, when you are preparing for the UPSC examination, you must start looking at issues in a neutral, apolitical and unbiased manner. In case if you have any kind of prejudices, any kind of preconceived notions, you must set aside those prejudices and preconceived notions and start forming your opinions based upon the empirical evidences. So that is what we are going to do in this particular session as well. And at the end of our discussion, you should be in a position to attempt these 4 prelims based questions as well as this mains question for the practice. The question here is, harnessing demographic dividend is considered as a key to a $5 trillion economy. In this regard, discuss as to how the government must reorient its socio-economic policies to handle the demographic transition in the next 2 decades. So let's understand the basics first. I hope all of you know the concept of fertility rate. Fertility rate basically tells us as to how many children are likely to be born to a woman during her reproductive age. Now, for example, in 1971, the fertility rate was 4.6. This means that statistically speaking, a woman gave birth to 4.6 children. Why it is 0.6? Because here we are speaking in terms of statistics, in terms of average. Now, this fertility rate in turn determines the overall population growth rate of a particular country. Higher the fertility rate, higher would be the population growth rate. For example, in 1971, the fertility rate was 4.6. Accordingly, for the year 1971 to 1981, the annual population growth rate was 4.6%. Now, the fertility rate has dropped down to 2.3 in the year 2016. This decline in fertility rate can be attributed to a number of factors such as the success of family planning programs, particularly the slogan of Hum Do Hamare Do, women empowerment, increase in literacy rate, increase in per capita income, increase in standard of living, which in turn is incentivizing the people to have less number of children. So multiple factors have led to decrease in the fertility rate, so much so that the fertility rate has reduced by almost half. As the fertility rate has reduced by half, even the population growth rate also reduced by half. For example, between the years 2011 to 2016, the average annual population growth rate is 1.3%. Going forward, it is expected that the fertility rate would further drop down to 1.6 to 1.7 by the end of 2041. Accordingly, our population growth rate after 2 to 3 decades may be well below 1%. Similar to the concept of fertility rate, we do have a concept of replacement level fertility. So in simple words, replacement level fertility basically tells us as to how many children should a woman give birth to so that the present generation gets replaced by the future generation. Now, for example, let's say in a particular country in 2030, it had a total population of 1 billion. So now, how many children should a woman give birth to so that in 2040, it is able to maintain a population of 1 billion. So in this particular case, the population is neither increasing nor it is decreasing. The population is remaining same. Similarly, let's say in 2050 also, the population should remain same at 1 billion. So if this has to happen, if the population has to remain stable, if the present generation has to get replaced by future generation, how many children should a woman give birth to? And that, according to a number of international organizations, has been calculated as 2.1. Now question is, why it is 2.1? Now in order to understand this, let's take an example. Now let's say in a particular family you have father and mother. Now here the question is, how many children should this mother give birth to so that this generation, that is the present generation, gets replaced by future generation? Obviously in this particular case, a mother should have to give birth to 2 children so that upon the death of the father and mother, that is upon the death of the present generation, in the future generation will have 2 children. So ideally this replacement level fertility should be equal to 2, but here it is 2.1. Now it is 0.1 extra because it may so happen that not all the children who are born, they may live up to their reproductive age group. Some children may die because of infant mortality rate or because of a number of reasons. That is why, to be on the safer side, we consider the replacement level fertility to be 0.1 higher at 2.1. Now in order to determine as to whether the population of a country will increase, whether it will decrease or whether it will remain stable, we would have to look at the relationship between the fertility rate and replacement level fertility. Now for example, if fertility rate is more than the replacement level fertility, this obviously means that the population of a country would continue to grow. On the other hand, if the fertility rate in a country becomes equal to the replacement level fertility, this shows that the population growth rate of a country will become equal to 0. So here the population will remain stable as shown in this particular example. On the other hand, if the fertility rate reduces to below the replacement level fertility, in that particular case, the population growth rate would be negative. This means that a country would see a decline in the population. Why is that? Because here, as I said, if the present generation has to get replaced by future generation, the fertility rate should be equal to the replacement level fertility. And if that is not happening, the present generation will not be able to get replaced by future generation. And accordingly, the country will start seeing a decline in the population. Now in particular, please look at this particular table here. By the end of 2041, the fertility rate in case of India, this is going to become like 1.6 to 1.7 and the replacement level fertility is 2.1. So what is going to happen is probably by the end of 2041 and beyond it, India can start seeing a decline in the population growth rate. Next, coming to the demographic transition model. See, the demographic transition model basically seeks to examine the nature of relationship between the socio-economic development and the population growth rate in a particular country. So it basically seeks to examine as to what would happen to population growth rate in a particular country in response to the process of development. Now, for example, a particular country to start off with, it can primarily be an rural and agrarian economy. And because of the process of development, such an economy can transform into urban and industrialized economy. So as this economy undergoes the transformation, what kind of changes take place with respect to population? That is what is being examined by the demographic transition model. So there are different stages in this particular model. As you can see in the first phase, both birth rates as well as death rates are quite higher, because of which the population growth rate would be lower. In the second phase, the birth rates would continue to remain higher, but the death rates would start declining. This is on account of factors such as introduction of vaccines, higher investment in health, access to food, and so on. So during this particular second phase, the population of a country would start increasing. In the third phase, even the birth rates would start declining on account of factors such as improved medical care, fall in infant mortality rate, and so on. So here there would be a drastic increase in the population growth rate. So as far as India is concerned, India is presently in this particular phase. That is, it is in the third phase where there is increase in the population, and this is accompanied by a decline in birth rates as well as the death rates. When it comes to stage 4, in stage 4 we will come across low birth rates as well as low death rates. More importantly, in this particular case, the fertility rate reaches the replacement level fertility, and the population will then start stabilizing. So here we can consider the examples of developed economies such as US, UK, etc. Even in case of India, the southern states, particularly those states in which the fertility rate has already crossed the replacement level fertility, in these states we can consider to have a stable population. As far as which are these states, I will be discussing in the next slide. When it comes to the last stage is characterized by extremely low level of birth rates. Here, the fertility rate will be much below the replacement level fertility. So here we can consider countries such as Japan, Germany, Russia to be the current examples. And as far as India is concerned, some states in India can come into this particular category after 2041. Now, to understand as to how the demographic transition has taken place in case of India, you can look at this particular figure from the economic survey, which highlights about the decline in the total fertility rate. As you can see, the total fertility rate has been reducing since 1971, and now the total fertility rate at all India level, it stands at 2.3. But at the same time, you must understand that the fertility rate of different states vary. Already in some of the states, the fertility rate has dropped down to below the replacement level fertility. So you can look at the states such as Delhi, West Bengal, Tamil Nadu, Jammu and Kashmir, Himachal Pradesh, Punjab, the southern states such as Andhra Pradesh, Telangana, and so on. In all of these states, the fertility rate is below the replacement level fertility. So just look at this particular model here. Prior to 1971, the fertility rate at all India level was higher. So that time, that is prior to 1971, India was in this particular phase. And as you can see, after 1971, the fertility rate has started dropping. Accordingly, India then moved to the third stage, that is the late transition phase. But as I said before, already some states in India have a fertility rate below the replacement level fertility. So all of these states right now can be considered to be in the fourth stage, that is a post-transition phase. So not just the southern states, but even other states such as West Bengal, Delhi, Jammu Kashmir, Himachal Pradesh, Punjab, etc. or can also be considered to be stage 4, that is a post-transition. In fact, the economic survey had mentioned that the state of Tamil Nadu can see an increase in its population only until the end of 2031. Beyond 2031, the state of Tamil Nadu can start seeing a decline in its population unless there is influx of migrants. So unless we do not have migrants coming into Tamil Nadu can start seeing a decline in its population after 2031. So it is expected that these states here all of these states here will probably move into the next stage, that is the stage 5, the aging stage after 2041. So the states such as West Bengal, Delhi, Jammu Kashmir, etc., all of these states can move into the next stage after 2041. Coming to demographic transition in India, so depending upon the age, people can be divided into 3 different age groups of 0 to 19, 20 to 59 and greater than 60. As per the census of 2011, 41% of India's population is in the age group of 0 to 19, 51% is in the age group of 20 to 59 and 8% is in the age group of greater than 60. As you can see, a major chunk or a major percent of India's population is in the working age group of 20 to 59. That is why we keep saying that India is presently staring at demographic dividend, which means here we can use our demography or our population as a tool of development. If you are able to create employment opportunities for people in the working age group, we would be able to optimally harness our human resources and hence promote higher GDP growth rate. Now, as I said earlier, in case of India, the fertility rate has been declining. Now the fertility rate is 2.3 at all India level, but by the end of 2041, it is expected to be at 1.6 to 1.7. What this means is, going forward, the average number of children likely to be born to women, this is set to reduce. So this decrease in the overall fertility rate in India, this is in turn going to change our age composition. This is going to change our age structure, and hence that change which I am speaking about, we call this as demographic transition. Now for example, let's see this from the perspective of the age group of 0 to 19. So as the fertility rate is reducing, can I say here that less number of children would be born in India in the next 2 to 3 decades? So as the less number of children would be born, the proportion of people in the age group 0 to 19, this is set to reduce. So this is set to reduce from 41% to 25% by the end of 2041. With respect to the people in the age group of 20 to 59. So now in the next 2 to 3 decades, more percentage of population from this particular age group of 0 to 19, they will move into the next age group of 20 to 59. Because of which the proportion of people in the working age group of 20 to 59, this will increase from 51% to 59%. But beyond 2041, we would no longer see an increase in the share of working age population. So beyond 2041, India will start seeing a decline in the proportion of the people in the working age group. As far as the next age group is concerned, that is the senior citizen age group, in next 2 to 3 decades, more number of people from the age group of 20 to 59 would now move into the age group of more than 60, because of which the percentage of people in the age group of greater than 60, this is set to double from 8 to 16%. So as you can see here, as the fertility rate is reducing, the proportion of people in the different age groups, that is going to change. For the people in the age group 0 to 19, this is set to reduce. For the people in the working age group of 20 to 59, this is going to increase, but this will increase only until the end of 2041. Beyond 2041, we will start seeing a decline in the share of the working age population. And as far as the senior citizens is concerned, the proportion of senior citizens is set to double from 8% to 16%. So this is a kind of demographic transition which we are going to witness in the next 2 to 3 decades. So in response to this particular demographic transition, which is going to take place over the next 2 to 3 decades, the government of India has to reorient its socio-economic policies with respect to each of these 3 age groups. Now, for example, with respect to age group of 20 to 59, as I said earlier, the proportion of people in this particular age group is set to increase only until the end of 2041. Beyond 2041, we will start seeing a decrease in the share of this particular working age group. So which means that we have a limited window. we have a limited opportunity to optimally harness this demographic dividend. Accordingly, the government here has to reorient its socio-economic policies and give more amount of emphasis on skilling and reskilling of the working age population. It has to focus more upon creation of employment opportunities. If you are not being able to do that, the demographic dividend which we are facing right now can well turn into demographic curse. That is why the government has to reorient its economic policies. Similarly, with respect to age group of 0 to 19, the government has to reorient its policies in a number of manner. It has to focus more upon the maternal health in order to ensure that the children who are born in India are healthy, they are well nourished. It has to focus on improving the learning outcomes. Now this becomes quite important because even though the gross enrollment ratio in the primary education has increased to around 100%, the learning outcomes have continued to remain poor. So we need to ensure that the quality of learning which we are imparting to students, that should be higher. Nextly, we would have to focus on enhancing the gross enrollment ratio in the higher education, which even today has remained quite lower at 26%. Another very important recommendation by the Economic Survey 2018-19 is with respect to consolidation of primary schools. Let's understand the rationale behind this particular recommendation. Now, presently in case of India, within a radius of 1 to 3 kilometers, we can come across at least 2 to 3 primary schools. And the number of children who are enrolled in these primary schools may be less than 50, which means that it is not viable to operate these primary schools in the long run. In the long run, as I discussed, less number of children will be born. So obviously going forward, the enrollment in these 3 primary schools is not going to increase. So what can possibly be done here is, in order to make the primary schools more viable, probably all of these 3 primary schools can be consolidated. But once again, here, while consolidating the primary schools, we must ensure that access to primary education is not compromised. So this is very important. And when we consolidate these 3 primary schools into a single large primary school, we must ensure that this large primary school is made accessible to all the students in the surrounding village. So the idea here is, without compromising on access to education, we would have to consolidate the existing primary schools which are located too close to each other and have a strength of less than 50 students. So going forward, we would have to focus more upon the quality of primary education rather than building more number of primary schools. Similarly, as far as the senior citizens age group is concerned, the senior citizens age group proportion is set to double from 8 to 16%. So accordingly, we will have to focus more upon upgrading the healthcare facilities for the senior citizens, which so far has been neglected. Secondly, we would have to increase the retirement age from 60 to say 65. This will enable us to optimally utilize the services of the senior citizens of the age group of more than 60. So this is how the government has to reorient its socio-economic policies with respect to each of these 3 age groups. So coming to the main question for practice, here the question was as to how should the government reorient its socio-economic policies to handle the demographic transition in next 2 decades. So if you look at the approach of this particular answer, first and foremost, you must highlight as to what kind of demographic transition is going to take place in the next 2 decades. So as you can see in the introduction itself, you must mention that in the next 2 decades, India is going to witness a kind of demographic transition. In order to further substantiate your point, you can incorporate this particular table. As far as the body of the answer is concerned, in the body of the answer, you must discuss as to how the government must reorient its socio-economic policies towards each section of the population structure. So whatever points which I have discussed here, say about the job creation, skilling and reskilling, consolidation of schools, upgradation of health facilities, retirement age, and so on, all of these points can be written. And lastly, in a conclusion, as a kind of way forward, you can write that in order to become a $5 trillion economy, India needs to employ an inclusive approach that focuses on each section of the population structure that is witnessing a change. So this is how you can approach the answer to this particular question. As far as the prelims based MCQs is concerned, after going through the discussion, I am pretty sure that most of you would be in a position to know the answer about the MCQ 1, MCQ 2 as well as MCQ 3. As far as MCQ number 4 is concerned, I would want you to find out as to what exactly do you mean by sun meta preference. You can let us know in the comments section. Once you get to know about the sun meta preference, please try to attempt this particular MCQ. Please let me know the answers to all of these 4 MCQs in the comments section. In case if you want to know the right answer, in case if you want the detailed explanation to these questions, you can attempt the quiz on the ELEARN platform. The detailed explanation has been provided there. The next article appears on page number 11. This article shall be important from the perspective of GS Paper 2 Polity and Governance, particularly under the subsection of criminalization of politics. See, the criminalization of politics basically refers to the entry of criminals into politics. So basically here the criminals are making entry into politics. They are contesting elections and they are going on to become the MPs and MLAs. Over a period of time, there has been a growing criminalization of politics in case of India. For example, according to the Association for Democratic Reforms, almost around 43% of MPs in case of India face serious criminal charges. See, one of the reasons as to why there has been a growing criminalization of politics is because of a kind of symbiotic association between politicians and criminals. When we say criminalization of politics, it refers to the entry of criminals into politics. And when we say politicization of crime, this basically refers to the fact that politicians as such are in turn dependent upon criminals for money and muscle power during the elections. So there is a kind of symbiotic association between politicians and criminals. Politicians need criminals in order to improve their chances of winning the elections, whereas the criminals need politics in order to carry forward their criminal activities. So because of this reason, there has been a growing criminalization of politics. This has in turn adverse implications for Indian democracy. It leads to poor quality of lawmaking, particularly when lawbreakers become the lawmakers. This leads to poor morale and motivation of civil servants, wherein IAS officers, IPS officers, etc. have to take orders from the people who have the criminal background. This leads to erosion of trust and confidence of the people in the functioning of the government. And more importantly, it leads to flow of money and muscle power in the elections. Hence, in order to check the growing criminalization of politics, the Supreme Court of India had come out with the directions in a very famous case known as the Public Interest Foundation versus Union of India case. In this particular case, the Supreme Court of India had put certain obligations on the political parties. The Supreme Court had said that all the political parties must compulsorily publish the names of the candidates who have the criminal background on their websites. Not just that, not only they do have to publish the names of the candidates with the criminal background, but they must also give reasons as to why they have chosen these people with the criminal background to contest the elections. So the basic idea here is to ensure greater accountability on the part of political parties. The idea here is to ensure that the political parties do not give tickets to the people with a criminal background. However, this particular article here highlights that so far most of the political parties have failed to comply with the Supreme Court directions in this particular case. Accordingly, the Supreme Court may decide to provide for a punishment to these political parties. In this regard, let us try to understand as to what kind of measures have we put in order to prevent the criminalization of politics, what are the problems with these measures, and what should be done going forward. See, Article 324 to Article 329 deal with the conduct of elections. Apart from that, the Parliament of India has been empowered to make law in order to regulate and conduct the elections. Accordingly, the Parliament has come up with two laws. One is the Representation of People's Act 1950 and second one is the Representation of People Act 1951. According to RPA 1950, This act provides for the qualification of voters, preparation of electoral rolls, delimitation of constituencies, and allocation of seats to different states. Whereas the RPA 1951 deals with the actual conduct of elections. More importantly, it lays down the qualification and disqualification of members for contesting the elections. So if you look at the important provisions of this particular law to check the criminalization of politics, it has two important provisions. The first provision is with respect to filing of affidavit. See, under this particular provision, if any person is contesting the elections, such a candidate would be required to provide basic information during the nomination process. This information could be the form of the amount of assets and liabilities that he has, his educational qualifications, and in case if he has any kind of criminal antecedents, he is required to declare that. Now presently, if a person files a false affidavit, such a person can be imprisoned for a period of 6 months. Now for example, a person has a criminal background, but such a person fails to disclose that criminal background while filing the affidavit. Automatically such a person can be imprisoned for a period of 6 months. Now the Election Commission of India believes that this particular imprisonment period of 6 months for filing a false affidavit is too less. Accordingly, the Election Commission of India believes that we need to increase the punishment for filing false affidavits from the present 6 months to at least say 2 years. Secondly, under the RPA Act 1951, the Parliament has come up with an elaborate list of what constitutes the corrupt practice. If a person is involved in any of these corrupt practice, such a person automatically gets disqualified from contesting the elections. Not just that, a person is barred from contesting elections for a period of 6 years after his release. Now, for example, if a person is involved in any of these corrupt practices, and let's say such a person has been released from prison in the year 2020, now this particular person will not be able to contest elections at least until the end of 2026. That is for a period of 6 years after his release. Now, some of the grounds on which a person can be barred from contesting the elections include bribery, undue influence, making an appeal to the voters to vote on the grounds of religion, caste, race, language, promotion of enmity among different communities, and so on. So as we can see, presently this particular provision is a very important provision which can check the entry of criminals into politics. But once again, the problem here is this particular act will come into picture only when a person gets convicted or when he is sentenced to imprisonment. This particular act or provision does not come into picture when a person is accused. Now let's say there is a particular person who is involved in a very serious crime. He is an accused person, but we know that presently the courts in case of India take a lot of time to dispose of the case. So such a person who is actually a criminal can still contest elections simply because he has not been convicted of his offences by the court. Simply because he is still an accused person, he can still contest the elections. Apart from that, according to the Election Commission of India, presently we are enabling the entry of criminals 6 years after their release. As I said here a person would be able to contest elections in the year 2026, that is 6 years after his release. So here once again a person who has a criminal background, who may have committed serious crimes in the past, such a person once again has been enabled to contest the elections. Accordingly, the Election Commission of India feels that if a particular person has been convicted and sentenced for certain serious offences, such kind of people should be permanently disqualified from contesting the elections. They should not be allowed to contest elections even after 6 years after their release. So these are some of the important electoral reforms which have been proposed by the Election Commission of India to check the growing criminalization of politics in India. With this, let us now take up the next article.
Page number 5 of today's newspaper, there's a mention of a news which talks about aquaculture farmers to sell their produce on eSanta. This news appears to be regional news from Andhra Pradesh, but this platform is very important for us to understand in terms of the UPSC examination. It clearly mentions that eSanta is going to be an electronic marketplace to export marine products, and this is going to be a platform which is going to connect aqua farmers and buyers across the country to avoid middlemen. Now, this news is important from the perspective of economic and social development, and as a subtopic, it will come under e-technology in the aid of farmers. So whenever we talk about these kind of platforms like eSanta or eNAM, we need to understand how these platforms are going to help the farmers in order to get best price for their produce. Now, the second important aspect is to understand how these platforms are going to facilitate the entire journey. In this context, pay attention to this aspect. First and foremost, the question is what is eSanta? So we can always focus upon what is the full form of it. And the full form of this is Electronic Solution for Augmenting NACSA, that is National Center for Sustainable Aquaculture, Farmers Trade in Aquaculture. So this is the agency which is going to be a pivotal agency in terms of defining this platform. And what it is going to do, it is going to provide us a platform. And this platform is going to connect the farmers with the exporters. Now, as far as the farmers and exporters are concerned, they have few specific requirements. When we talk about farmers, they have a specific requirement in terms of they want to list their produce. So farmers are producing and they want a listing system so that this becomes public and people who are interested, especially exporters, they can buy the products directly from them. And second important aspect is they want to quote price as well. So once they quote the price, they basically can command a better pricing. Similarly, exporters who are also looking for this kind of a platform, and they are looking for two major things. First, they can list the requirements. Now, farmers are producing something, but at the same time, when we talk about the exporters, exporters are also looking for a system in which they can present their requirements so that farmer can actually provide the things that they require. And second important aspect is they can choose the products as well. So whenever we talk about exporters in terms of choosing the products, they basically want products of particular quality. They also want products from particular region, and they also want to define the harvesting time as well. So in this context, when we talk about this particular platform, this platform is going to facilitate the relationship between farmers and exporters. It will avoid middlemen and it basically lead to informed decision making. The context that is important from the perspective of eSanta is informed decision making on the behalf of farmers as well as exporters. Now, whenever you talk about platforms like eSanta, we should also talk about related platform like eNAM. So you must be aware of the fact that there is an eNAM portal, and that is Pan India Electronic Trading Portal. The way in which this eNAM portal works, it basically sets up a network of existing APMC mandis to create a unified national market for agricultural commodities. So you can see here, this is eNAM. It works as an electronic trading portal. It works by creating a network of existing APMCs which actually work as unified national market for agriculture commodities. Now, when we talk about eNAM, it is important for you to understand that Ministry of Agriculture has appointed a small farmers agribusiness consortium, which is also called as SFAC, and this is also the leading implementation agency for eNAM. So this topic is important, and in prelims you might see this particular aspect, that which is the leading implementing agency of eNAM, and it is not the Ministry of Agriculture, but it is SFAC. Now, since we have talked about eSanta and we have talked about aquaculture as well, so let's take this discussion forward to understand more about fisheries or blue revolution in India. The topic of blue revolution is very important from the perspective of UPSC examination, and it is expected that we are going to see a question on blue revolution or fisheries in India in the future as well. Now, in this context, if we want to prepare ourselves for this particular question, we should actually organize the knowledge and information for this particular topic in a very specific manner. For this particular purpose, you can utilize this format as well. Now, the first thing that we need to know is basic things about fisheries in India. And in this context, we have designed this particular box. Now, when we talk about fisheries, we have to identify what are the major attributes of fisheries in India. And in this context, India is the second largest producer of fish and also second largest aquaculture nation. Now, the impact of fisheries in India is that employs a lot of people, that is 16 million farmers at primary level. So when we say primary level, it means the people who are involved in directly fishing and collecting the fish. If we talk about processing, transport, and other aspect, this number is actually double. So around 30 to 31 million people are attached to the second aspect, that is secondary level of fishing as well. So the employment potential of fisheries is very high. As far as contribution in GDP is concerned, the contribution earlier was in 1950-51, it was as low as 0.4%. But today, when we look at the situation, it actually contributes 1% of GDP. Also, we need to understand that when we talk about the fisheries are distributed in the sense that it actually utilizes 78% of marine resources and 58% of inland resources in that sense. So, if we look at this particular thing, we can see the kind of opportunity that is still pending at our end where we can improve upon. The moment we have understood the importance of fisheries in India, we can move to the next aspect in terms of what kind of constraints we see. So in terms of constraints, we can define few aspects. First and foremost, we need to understand the constraint in terms of distribution. So there are two major distribution. First is of course marine distribution, and second is inland or freshwater distribution. So in terms of marine distribution, the major problems that fisheries as a segment deals with, that there's a limited scope of expansion due to over capacities in territorial waters. So we can see here that around 78% of marine fisheries is actually exploited. So in this sense, we can see that the potential to expand is limited here. Now only 22% is left in that sense. Now apart from that, we need to focus on inefficient management as well. So inefficient management deals with multiple things. We use traditional fishing practices. We have inadequate infrastructure, because when we talk about fishing, fishing requires fishing harbors, landing centers, cold chain, distribution system. Processing is also very important. So value addition is somewhere very limited. Moreover, this kind of fishing also looks for certification in terms of the quality of fish. What is the breed? What is the type? So that is also is missing in that sense. So the major issues that challenge the marine capture is inefficient management and lack of infrastructure. Similarly, when we talk about inland capture, we know that there are two aspects which are very important. First and foremost is the seasonal nature of fish catch. Now, in India, when you talk about, many rivers are perennial in nature, even the ponds, lakes, and rivers. But we have seen that the fish produce offsprings in a season, and that is why seasonal nature becomes a very important aspect. Moreover, as the water bodies are getting limited, we have seen many water bodies disappear. So the stock of the fish, when talk about, is also getting depleted. This is also caused by the kind of pollution that we have seen in our rivers and our water bodies. So this is something which is very important. So there are two aspects: marine capture and the inland capture. The third important aspect that we can talk about is issues at culture fisheries. So when we talk about culture fisheries, it means when we are actually using this technique of fisheries in a defined environment. So when we use it in terms of artificial environment, we have multiple options available. Now in this context, the kind of problem that we have seen is lack of species diversification. We are focusing on one particular species only. Second important aspect is there is lack of emphasis of new form of cultural fisheries, such as cold water fisheries or ornamental fisheries, or fisheries that can be used for food in terms of rice cum fish culture system. And then we also need to use wastewater aquaculture. Now when you talk about the issues, there are some institutional issues as well, because farmers or the fishermen who are participating in this, they require credit as well. So there is actually absence of institutional credit, or credit is available, it is at a very high cost. And then the kind of infrastructure support they require in order to maintain these culture fisheries is actually cost intensive. So in that sense, a lot of support is required. So in terms of constraints to Blue Revolution India, we can define them in the three broad categories aspect. Now, once we have done that, we can move to the next part, and that can be how we can actually handle this challenge. Now, in this sense, we have clearly specified few points. Now, the first point in this sense is horizontal expansion of untapped areas. So we are aware of the fact that when we talk about marine or inland, we use the capacity of 78 and 58% respectively. So in that sense, we basically can expand our operation in that sense, and we can move to other areas where we can talk about brackish aquaculture or cold water fisheries. So this is something which is very important. Now the second important aspect apart from horizontal is vertical expansion as well. Now when we talk about vertical expansion, it actually means diversification of culture species. So when we talk about a particular species, so we are diversifying in that particular species only. Apart from that, we can also focus on integrated farming system where we actually integrate fishing with other aspect. Apart from that, we can focus on again food aspect of rice cum fish culture, wastewater aquaculture in this vertical expansion. The next important aspect is we need to pay attention to both aspect, resource as well as exploitation of resource. So in that sense, restoration of natural productivity and conservation is a very important aspect. Now, when we talk about blue revolution in India, the farmers are poor, and in that sense they cannot participate as much in terms of restoration of natural productivity. So the government has to take some initiative in terms of ensuring that these water bodies remain healthy in that sense, and apart from that sense they implement measures which are important for the conservation of species in that region. Now, upgradation of fishing fleet, this is a very important aspect. When we talk about fishing, the equipments that are used are very important in terms of marine fishing. So upgradation of fishing fleet is very important so that they can go deeper into the sea and can bring the fish to the coast. Next important aspect is seed, feed and health. Now, whenever we talk about fisheries, we need to focus on few aspects which are related to conservation. So whenever we exploit particular region in terms of drawing fish, we need to seed that area. Once we seed that area, we need maturity in fish as well in terms of age. Then we have to focus on the feed. If we provide the right feed, what will happen? Things will become better, and this will lead to healthy yield in terms of fish as well. Now we have already mentioned few aspects of technical and managerial gap which we need to bridge very regularly, and we should also focus on ecological certification. Now once we define ecological certification, this is going to boost export in a tremendous way. And since we have just talked about e-Santa, so one of the requirement is of course of e-market and e-trading of fish, which is much more efficient in nature, whereby we can actually remove middlemen in this entire process, and the benefits can actually be taken by the person who is directly involved in this activity. So in this sense, these are the important aspect of blue revolution in India. Now since we are talking about this particular issue, we should also focus on Pradhan Mantri Matsya Sampada Yojana. Now, the targets about this particular scheme relate to 2024 and 25. So, in that sense, it is highlighted here that the targets are for 2024-25. In this particular period, the government is planning to enhance fish production by an additional 70 lakh tons by 2024-25. And this can lead to increased export, and targets in terms of the kind of value it will generate is around rupees 1 lakh crores. Apart from that, this will also lead to doubling of farmers' income in this particular yield aspect. Now, there will be other aspect as well. The post-harvest losses, right now they stand at around 20-25%. They are planning to reduce this to just 10% and generating additional employment opportunities of around 5.5 million. So in this sense, this scheme is very important. So if we look into the entire situation of blue revolution in India, we have highlighted few things which are very important for you to understand. First and foremost, we have defined the nature of fisheries in India. Second, we have highlighted the constraints that are there. Third, we have talked about the strategies, and we have also talked about a government scheme in that sense. Now, we have put a detailed note about this particular scheme in the notes as well. Please do refer to them. And if you put them together, it will give you a good answer of this particular question in terms of identify what is the status of blue revolution in India, what are the strategies that are needed to challenge this, and what are the government schemes which are focusing on this particular aspect of economy. So if you have this kind of a question in mains in future, you can easily handle this question from what is displayed on the screen, and this can be a ready reference note. Page number 8 of today's newspaper presents a very important piece of information which speaks about Supreme Court annuls parts of cooperative amendment. Now, as far as this amendment is concerned, this is also called as 97th Amendment Act, and this was passed way back in 2011. Now, we need to also understand that Supreme Court has quashed only some provisions of the 97th Amendment. It is not that the entire amendment is scrapped. Second important aspect is Supreme Court has taken the stand because it feels that this particular amendment is violating principles of federalism. Now, in this context, we can actually deduce that this topic is important more from the perspective of Indian polity and constitution and its features. So in this context, we are going to analyze this article. But before moving further, if you are someone who is just a beginner, we have to understand what is the meaning of federalism. Now, the moment we talk about federalism, it simply means that the powers of a state are divided between two levels. First is, of course, the union, and second is the state. So federalism, in its basic essence, means powers are divided between the union and the state. Now, in terms of the division, there has to be a formal structure to that. In that context, the seventh schedule has lists which are called as union list, state list, and concurrent list. These lists basically define on what subjects which authority will make laws. So, union government will make laws which are mentioned in union list. Similarly, state government will make laws on the subjects which are explained in state list. For concurrent list, both union and state can make laws. So this is an important aspect that you must understand. Now moving to the discussion of the topic at hand, which talks about the Cooperative Amendment Act. Now in this context, let's first understand what is this act. Now when we talk about 97th Amendment Act, it basically brought multiple changes. First, it actually brought a freedom which was included in Article 19(1)(c). Through this 97th Amendment, it was made the right to freedom to form cooperative societies as a fundamental right. So this was basically added in this particular right. It also made another change. It added 43B in the Directive Principal State Policy, which is Part 4, and it clearly mentioned the state shall endeavor to promote voluntary formation, autonomous functioning, democratic control, and professional management of cooperative societies. So, somewhere it was realized that cooperative societies are very important for the development of the country and building bigger and better infrastructure, and hence it was given right in terms of fundamental rights, also in terms of directive principal state policy, which is very important. The next important aspect is a part that is 9B was also inserted in the constitution, which basically deals with incorporation, terms of members of the board and office bearers, and effective management of cooperative society. So in this sense, this was important because how cooperative society will run, this will define from this particular part, that is 9. So this is important from the perspective of how all these cooperative societies work, and hence Part 9B was inserted. So we can see the kind of status this particular Amendment Act has provided. It has made some changes in terms of incorporation in fundamental rights, directive principal state policy, and also the Constitution 9B. Now here, the insertion of Part 9B is actually the most contentious issue that is getting scrapped by the Supreme Court's order. Now, once this particular Amendment Act was passed, there was a case which was filed by Mr. Rajendra N. Shah versus Union of India. The hearing of this particular case, Gujarat High Court has actually annulled some of the provisions which were inserted in Part 9B. And they were basically annulled on the basis of that this particular provisions runs counter to the spirit of fundamental rights. Now, please try to understand how it is running counter to the spirit of fundamental rights. First and foremost, in 19(1)(c), we have given freedom of actually creating cooperative societies. And second, in the provisions of Part 9B, we are defining how different members will be appointed, how many members will be appointed, and what will be their qualifications or tenure in that sense. So it means that the kind of freedom that we have provided in 19(1) and also through 43B, that is not being practiced in terms of part of 9B. And that was the primary reason why Gujarat High Court has basically annulled the parts of this particular amendment. Now, this case went further up. This case further went up to Supreme Court, and the recent decision that we are discussing today is a decision which was given by Supreme Court by a majority of 2:1. Supreme Court on Tuesday has actually rejected some of the parts of the amendment by a majority of 2:1, and Supreme Court was specially critical of provisions 243ZH to 243ZT, which are part of insertion of 9B. Now, Supreme Court has clarified that these provisions are basically running counter to the federal principles. Why so? Now, when we talk about the cooperative sector is mentioned in the state list, which is item 32. If anyone is expected to make laws, the states are expected to make laws and not the union government. So the provisions which are mentioned in the constitutional provisions of 9B, 243, ZH2ZT, they go against the spirit of federalism. Second important aspect is that the power of the parliament to make this amendment was limited as well. The reason for this is very simple. States should have also ratified this particular amendment. But when we talk about the 97th Amendment, the states have not ratified it. The reason for this is very simple, because if we are going to take away the power of the states in terms of state list, these provisions have to be ratified by the states. But in this case, these provisions have not been ratified, and that is what Supreme Court has highlighted in its judgment. Now, as mentioned earlier, Supreme Court has quashed only some of the provisions of the 97th Amendment Act. Now, there is one more thing that we need to pay attention to, that multi-state cooperative societies are important for the growth of cooperative sector in India, and the court has held that parliament was well within its right to make laws on multi-state cooperatives, since the subject falls under the union list. So this is an important aspect that you must know, and you also need to pay attention to the fact that those provisions of Article 243, if we talk about, which dealt with multi-state cooperative societies, they have not been scrapped in this judgment. So this judgment assumes significance in the background of fears voiced by states whether the new Central Ministry of Cooperation would disempower them. So we need to understand this particular issue as a development to the aspect of governance, where the government has created a new ministry, that is Ministry of Cooperation, and this particular judgment will have an impact or bearing on Ministry of Cooperation as well. So, as a UPSC aspirant, you must focus on this particular issue about how it develops and how it basically touches various issues in terms of governance as well as in ethics.
With this, we have come to the end of today's discussion. Now, the answer to the question that was asked in yesterday's DNS is option B.